So I'm pleased to introduce Brion Vibber from the Wikimedia Foundation. And he's been with Wikimedia for about 4 years now, and during which he's seen pretty staggering growth. He's going to talk to you today about the current state of affairs on Wikipedia. A little bit of trivia. Up until recently, Brion was the only full-time paid employee for the engineering side of things. That just kind of gives you an idea of just how many volunteers are working on Wikipedia-related things. Also, as another note, this is going to be published on Google Video.
Hi, so probably most of you have heard of Wikipedia. In case you haven't, it's this crazy website. It's theoretically at least an encyclopedia where people around the world can add stuff which hopefully is accurate to it. And so that's our crazy thing that we do. And obviously we have software and servers and all that to support it. So we try to make them work. But Wikipedia itself is a bit of a strange creature. It serves sort of two groups of people, both the public at large, because it's trying to be a serious reference site for people around the world in many languages, across time into the future, but it's a resource that's freely available and freely reusable under open content licenses, which are of course, kind of tied in with the whole open source thing and Creative Commons and all that stuff. And also because of the way it's built, materials are always up to date. Current events, etc., are immediately filtered right into the encyclopedia. But also it serves the community of editors and users who are actually editing on the site. And to them, it's almost more like a online game in that it's a community where you hang out a bit and sort of work through and do something that's a little bit of fun. You whack some trolls, you build some material, etc. But all this sort of makes it complicated to work with because the site is very dynamically changing, which means that things like caching and serving updated data is somewhat complicated, but we do our best. Through the last 4 years, most of our effort on actually the tech end has been just dealing with the growth in use. And this is a graph from the Alexa Internet rankings showing just the last 2.5 years where we've gone up from the tiny little site to big, huge percentage of all internet views, which is kind of frightening. But all of that is the kind of growth that we've been going through, going from about a half a dozen, maybe a dozen servers at the beginning of that graph. Actually, at the beginning of that graph, it's more like 4 servers, to over 100 now, just keeping up with that level of growth of both people reading the site and people working on the site. But there's somewhat of complicated things with that, in that we have to deal with database replication. That's nothing terribly complicated, but it is something to deal with. We have probably the only wiki software that we're aware of that really is explicitly built for scaling, because we check for lagging database slaves. We have a whole second caching layer of data, which generally isn't used on a small site. And we very explicitly work with our proxy servers to maintain cached data across continents. But that's all very boring, really. So assuming that all the simple technical problems can be solved, which of course they can given sufficient manpower, what other things might we be doing? We can integrate more with the rest of the web, improve the user experience, have all our little Ajax goodies. We can improve what happens when something goes wrong, if there's a transient error in the network or in some server. And of course, we can make it a lot faster. because everyone likes a fast website. In our development, a recent change that we've made is to sort of move forward with very active development. Instead of doing a release every couple of times a year, which we used to do, now we're very actively pushing updates immediately to the Wikipedia site. We're doing more testing. Updates and changes and new features are going live very soon. We're working in Subversion instead of CVS, which makes it a lot easier to do those big, slow work projects in separate branches. And then the MediaWiki releases, which go out to all the thousands of third-party users using our software, are now on a quarterly schedule, which helps to get those features into the hands of other people a lot sooner as well. So, now that we're actually really working on things, it's time to think about what is it that makes the wiki interesting, and what is it that has to be changed for not just the technical issue of scaling, which is that we have a lot of requests that need to be served, but also the social issues of scaling, which is that we have a whole lot of pages and a whole lot of people, and how do we get interesting material to people who can review it, and how do we get interesting people to material they can work on. So a question that I get asked a lot by journalists and people who don't really have any idea about the internet is, so how's a wiki different from a blog? They've heard of a blog. Everyone's heard of a blog. But they maybe haven't heard of a wiki. Obviously, the biggest difference is that blogs are more popular. But I also like to say that blogs exist in more of a temporal dimension. You have a series of posts, one after the other. When there are comments made on a post, they're again in a serialized temporal sort of monologue with comments. But wikis exist in more of a spatial environment. You have many different materials, both in idea space and in physical space. Each page is a separate entity, but that entity is constantly changing, constantly being updated. The conversation, as it were, is in the actual content of the page instead of a series of separate comments. But it's not just idea space and physical space, it's also people space. A blog is mostly a monologue. It's one person, then other people respond to them. Wiki is a much more collaborative environment. You have a whole bunch of people with different interests working on different parts of it and also working together on the same parts of it. They're not just publishing at each other, they're publishing with each other. So if we have space and we have time, what about space-time? There's a very strong time element in wikis as well, which is important. There's a series of changes which happen to the entire system. The traditional recent changes view is the general way of seeing what's going on in a wiki, what's the overview of it. Any particular page has a whole series of changes to it. That's actually not an original part of the wiki concept. The original wiki that Ward Cunningham created had only a single version at a time, and he only later added additional versions for recovery from vandalism. But in a lot of wikis, and especially in our wikis, in MediaWiki, we very strongly maintain every version of every page, which of course accumulates. So you have George W. Bush, it's edited hundreds of times a day on Wikipedia. You can see just the last 10 edits covers a few hours. And if you kept clicking that view next 1000, you could go for quite a long time. The problem with time is that there's not enough of it. There's too much space in too much time. You can sit there watching all the changes on Wikipedia and be completely overloaded by it. So how do we look through that? How do we actually manage at this scale dealing with all that material? Now, time and space on a wiki are, of course, strongly related. because changes over time on a page create changes in space. Each individual sentence, each individual word on the space of the page was changed at some point in time by some person. So you definitely want to be able to keep track of time if you're trying to keep track of the content. So when you have so much material and so much time, you need to do a little bit of compression. The same way as we take redundant data in the actual data transmission, we gzip it, it downloads a lot faster. When we're looking at data that a human wants to look at, we want to throw away redundant data, stuff that's not important, stuff you don't care about. In general, search on the web is a sort of filter, and it's a sort of compression in idea space. You have a view of the entire web, the entire internet, with bajillions of pages, and you say, I'm interested in just a subset of it, and a search engine will take out just that little subset and show you just the things you're interested in. So within a wiki, the sort of first level that we have is a watch list, or an RSS feed of that, where you take certain topics that I know I'm interested in. I'm interested in the page on MediaWiki itself. I want to know what people are asking about it. So I want to see updates to those pages. But that only gets you pages that you already know exist, that you already know you're interested in, and that, of course, already exist at the time that you say you're interested in them. So what if it's a new material, a new page, a new article, a new concept that maybe you didn't even know would be there? How do you even know that it comes into existence? You can't do that with the existing systems. So things to think about in the future that we might start adding are keyword-based watches, filtering based on similarity of pages, certain types of changes you might be interested in. For instance, any change that adds a certain kind of formatting or a certain kind of external link or whatever, you might be wanting to watch that sort of thing, in addition to just, this is an article I like. But also, that's within space, but things also exist within time. If you're watching the live feed of updates, which we have currently on a special IRC server, you can see they just keep scrolling on by one after the other, way too many. But you want to filter that if you actually want to do anything with it. What we have today is there are a number of people who have set up software that then keys into that, which goes and looks at those updates and tries to make some heuristic determinations about what kind of change it is, if it was just some junk edit or if it's something good, and then tries to perform an action based on it. For instance, if someone's just putting in blah, 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 this is a test, then it can be immediately reverted, or it can be flagged so someone can look at it. But that's just a start for maintenance tools. It also can be used to detect things that a particular person is interested, changes on a topic, about a person, whatever. And we would love to be able to put those within the web environment as well as just IRC and other external tools. Because obviously an external tool requires more user training, more user determination. It's not as accessible. It takes a lot more effort to hop in. But a lot of what we want in a wiki is making it very easy to hop in. With the absolute minimum of effort, someone should be able to jump in and become a contributor. So we don't want ultimately to have to say, oh, download an IRC client for your platform. Here's a list of 50 programs, because people are just going to give up and go away. We would love to be able to instead put those in the browser, if possible, some kind of wonderful streaming Ajax thing. Who knows? We'll see. This is all very sort of upcoming technology that we don't have yet, but we hope to see in the future. In addition, of course, to just the web, which is the first step, there's also that second step, which right now is the only step we have, of external tools, which then brings you even to the third step of integrated external tools. For instance, a desktop notification applet. This is the kind of thing people have now for instance, mail notification for their webmail application. They want to know they got mail. They might also want to know that something interesting happened on Wikipedia or on their company's internal website, or they're on a wiki, or what have you. So being able to have additional tools plug into the system, watch for interested changes, and pop that out to the user is something that we hopefully are going to see. Now, in addition to just published changes, there's also communication between users on the wiki. For each article, there's an associated discussion page, which is sort of like a forum, except really badly implemented. So making that into more of a real forum system, which understands both space and time, being able to bring new interesting discussions to the top, keeping old materials that have not yet been answered or become obsolete. Again, still keep them visible, but leave settled questions to settle down out of the way is another future direction that we can expect to see over the coming year. So once we're done worrying about publishing and sort of long-term interaction of the kind of email and message notifications and such forth, there's also simply the level of time at which people directly interact with the website. You click a button, it does something. Hopefully it does it fast, because if it does it slow, people get bored and they go away. The first element, obviously, is the software itself. If the software is slow, that is really bad, because then your website's slow. And your website's slow, people go away. So over time, we've been working on, again, this is the basic tech scaling problem of the software slow, profile it, find the slow parts, get rid of them. That's pretty boring. Let's assume that we've finished that everything's done, the software runs instantaneously, takes no time. But there's still time because the speed of light is limited. We have to get those packets from one place to another. We have our main servers in Tampa, Florida, and then we have additional servers elsewhere, but we don't have enough for every person to have instantaneous communication. It still takes a little bit of time, but even a little bit of time is enough to be annoying when you're clicking on a button and waiting for it. Now, caching proxies are the first wonderful step. If we have a user in Frankfurt, Germany, and they're contacting a SQUID proxy cache that we have in Amsterdam, it doesn't take much time, maybe 15, 20, 25 milliseconds. That's really fast. If they can get a cached page, it's very immediate, very quick, very pleasant experience. But we can only do that for static page views because of the way that caching is limited. And if you're stuck with a dynamic site where you're logged in, you have special permissions, special options, all that has to go back to the main servers across the ocean. And in sort of the best case here, we're looking at across the Atlantic from Europe to the East Coast. That's only, adds 115 milliseconds. But that's a tenth of a second. A tenth of a second is long enough to click and notice that there's a little bit of delay, just barely. And that's our best case. Our worst case is something like Asia, Australia, across the Pacific, where it can get a lot less pleasant. It takes a third second, half a second, even more. So another future direction that we can see is making those caches smarter. And that's going to be some hard work in terms of keeping data synchronized properly, but hopefully we'll figure it out. It's ultimately not a totally impossible problem. Because once we have the ability to have local databases and local application servers, then suddenly you've got that short 15 milliseconds all the time, except when you actually have to go back and make a change, which is pretty rarely. Only when you, say, save something. Then it goes back, takes another 115 milliseconds. So what? You don't even notice it. You expect it to take a little longer. But it does mean that we have to continue to improve our architecture to be able to make that distinction of knowing this request is going to be slow because it has to make a change. This request is going to be slow because it needs very, very current data, and our local data is a half a second behind. Making that determination is not always very easy because you don't know if something just changed half a second ago on another continent, because it takes you that half a second to get that information recorded, copied over, and then applied to the local database. But hopefully we can figure it out. Yes?
What's your ratio of read traffic versus write traffic?
That's a good question. I actually don't know offhand, but our squid proxies currently take about 70 to 80% of the total load, and those are virtually all read traffic, and those are people who are not logged in. And then we also have people who are logged in who are doing primarily read traffic. So I'll try to get actual statistics for that sometime because that's a good figure to have. Yes?
A related question is, if you had to find out what the maximum number of writes happen concurrently to a particular article, what would it look like? Or is it, for instance, are many people editing the same document at about the same time?
Yeah.
Well, for each document, there is some conflict control. Because if you make a change and then somebody else has started editing before you and then they save it, then the software says, hey, wait a minute, this page changed in the meantime. And it's kind of like a CVS check-in. It checks to see if there's a conflict, sees if it can automatically merge it. If it can, then it goes ahead and saves it. And if it can't, then it requires a user interaction to resolve the conflict. So generally, there is at least some degree of protection there of each individual page is basically limited to the rate at which people can resolve their conflicts. So hopefully, at least, it doesn't get to multiple per second, usually. In the worst case, it might if people actually are editing different parts of a long article really, really rapidly. But usually no. Generally, on an individual page, you'll see, even at fairly active times, there'll be an edit, and then maybe a minute later, another edit. So usually on an individual article, the rate isn't very great, but the rate overall keeps going up all the time. And right now, it's at something like 1 per second, more or less, of total edits on the English language Wikipedia site, which is our biggest. But we can expect that to double over the next year, probably.
Sometimes an article may get a few thousand edits per day, so when it's a hot topic, so that is happening.
It's very interesting to go to, for instance, an article like Hurricane Katrina or the London bombings last year, or other kind of major news events, or they would get a huge number of edits per day. But still, on an overall database perspective, it's not that much. It's just a few thousand. But a few thousand is still a lot. If you wanted to sit there and review every individual edit on those articles on those hot days when they were the thing to do, you'd sit there and download a 100 megabyte file of each change and go, what the hell? So it's very exciting sometimes. Yes?
So if you're paying this much attention to latency, it would seem like you've more or less solved, at least at this point, the data volume problems and the capacity and everything, which seems amazing if you've done that much growth, especially on commodity RDBMSs. Is that true?
Yeah, we haven't totally solved it yet, but we can expect it's going to improve a lot. We've made huge improvements in the PHP so far, and because our program is primarily in PHP, but we're eliminating bits here and there and bits here and there, and eventually it's going to get down very small. But even now, under the best cases, when load is not too high, when the databases are humming smoothly, you can get a pretty short processing time on the application server of 10, 20 milliseconds, and then having to wait 300 milliseconds for that page to get back to Australia becomes a noticeable chunk. So if we can hope that we can get to that point where we're always 10 to 20 milliseconds, then it's really going to matter as far as making that experience really nice. And the other thing that it gets you, which I think is even on my next slide, is that if you have that, then you can fail gracefully. Every once in a while, we'll have a problem with our central database or server cluster. We had a couple of power failures recently when a circuit breaker failed, and then it failed again, and then they replaced it. And that took out our whole main data center for a couple hours while we had to reboot everything. And during that time, if you hit the European or the Asian SQUID proxy and you had no cookie and you hit a page that had been previously viewed, then you could still read Wikipedia. But if you were logged in, you got an error page. Or if you wanted to look at a page that hadn't been seen before, you just got an error page that said, can't contact the server, so sorry. But if we could have local copies of the database and local application servers that are able to show that read data, then they could still show everything with no difficulty at all with the central database offline. And it's not just having the data center explode. It's also transient network errors. For instance, our European servers are hosted at no cost to us, which is very nice. But they're on an educational network, which is kind of experimental. And sometimes the network goes down a little while because they're upgrading something. So then, part of their network works so they can contact the outside world in Europe, but they can't contact our servers in the United States. And then all the European users come onto our IRC channel and say, Wikipedia doesn't work. And we say, it's working here. But if at those times they still had that local database that was able to say, well, I can't go back to the main server, but I can still show you what's current right now. They would still be able to read the site, see what's been going on recently, make their plans of what they're going to do in 5 minutes when everything comes back on. So certainly being able to improve the failure modes is a very attractive option. Any other questions in there? Because I think I'm actually near the end here. Yeah, a little more. Yeah?
So actually you are trying to replace the SQUID proxies by MediaWiki?
Possibly. If we get to the point where MediaWiki is fast enough that it can serve a lot of things, we'd probably still have SQUID in front or something like SQUID to serve even a little bit faster the totally anonymous views. But being able to then still serve most of that other 30% that can't be served by SQUID on a local server with much lower latency is very attractive. So hopefully that's something that we can swing.
It's a slightly detailed question. Do most people keep the page from the moment they click on edit to the moment they say save? Is that typically a long duration or a short duration for most people?
It depends. It can be very short. If you're, for instance, just making a spelling correction or something, then you'll click in, scroll down, type something in, hit save. It can take a couple of seconds. But it can also take a half hour or an hour where you're writing some big whole article from scratch. Or maybe you're doing some research in between or such forth. So, for instance, if we wanted to hold locks open on a page, that's something that would be a little bit scary because someone might just click edit because they want to see what it looks like and then they never actually change the article. Yes. Okay, one more.
So is it data GPL? I mean, what happens if somebody buys Wikipedia at some company?
The MediaWiki software is entirely GPL. So it's all open source. I think there's a fork or two that one or two people actually use, but most people seem to basically just use our software or modify a little bit with their custom extensions. Primarily, we target Wikipedia itself. That's what it was written for, and that's the main thing that we go for. And for instance, all these scaling features are things that most sites don't need. A few other sites also can use them. For instance, there's some third-party sites running MediaWiki that are fairly large. WikiTravel is a third-party site that people often confuses one of ours because it starts with wiki and it runs our software. But it's run by different people, and they've customized it in certain ways, but they're still basically working from our updates. And they also contribute back with new features and fixes and such forth. As far as people who are using it internally in corporate environments, for instance, we generally don't hear too much back from them. But there's certainly a lot of people using it, and we want to try to talk to them a little more and handhold that market a bit, as it were. Yes?
Did you learn anything from everything too? Besides what?
I think mostly the lessons of everything too are people say, I hate this about everything too, don't do it. But also people say, I love this about everything too, please do it. And then we look at it and we say, oh, that sounds terrible. So I guess there's certain matters of opinion in it. I haven't really examined it in detail, so I can't say too much. Yes?
So you talked about how one of the design goals was enabling people to get in and change something or add some knowledge as easily as possible. So it was clearly a conscious decision to not require people to register before they edit. Mm-hmm. There are obvious trade-offs, right? I mean, it's a small barrier.
It is a trade-off. There's a sort of continuum of making it really easy to edit and making it hard enough that people who aren't going to be productive don't bother, and making it hard enough that people who are going to be productive don't bother. So traditionally, we've erred on the very low side. And in a few places, we've bumped it up just a little bit. For instance, we do require a registration to upload multimedia files, because otherwise, the vast majority of pictures uploaded are somebody's photos of their party last night, or some photo that they downloaded off a website. And because it's on the internet, it's free, right? Or their porn collection. So we do have a little more of a bar there. And recently we raised the bar a bit on creating new articles in our largest site, which is the English language Wikipedia, where you do have to register first. But you can still edit an existing page without registering. And maybe we'll keep that forever, maybe we won't. Certainly as the site continues to grow and to mature, it becomes, to a certain degree, less important to produce new content. And it becomes more important to tend the existing content, which changes a bit the kind of community that you want and the kind of behavior that you want from people joining. But to a certain extent, we're also going to handle that by sort of layering a review system, a sort of version freezing or tagging system on top of saying, this version of this article is known good, it's been fact-checked, it's been reviewed by someone who knows what they're doing and did a little research and checked the references, but there's also new versions that you can look at. So our kind of long-term goal is that when some random person gets onto some random article, they should see that it's either A, been reviewed and checked for accuracy, or B, has not been, and that therefore they should give less credence, perhaps, take it with a little more grain of salt. Obviously, anything you read on the internet you have to take with a grain of salt, and you should never use a single resource if you're doing serious research, and you should never ever use an encyclopedia as your sole source if you're doing serious research. An encyclopedia is a starting point, even if it's, say, Britannica. But we still want to have accurate information, obviously. We don't always want to have, George Bush is a big jerk as the top of the article. Even though some people would say it's true, that's not the sort of language that we probably want in an encyclopedia.
So continuing on that, obviously you're sensitive to the spam graffiti ban as a problem. Do you think it's been overblown at all? Because there's been a lot of hype about it.
I think it's definitely overblown, but at the same time, it is real, and it's something that we maybe need to pay a little more attention to how it's perceived. Because most, spam or junk, either no one actually really saw it because it was gone immediately, or no one actually really saw it because no one actually looks at that article. Articles that are really solidly paid attention to, that people actually look up, will tend to get cleaned up right smack right away. But because on those lesser seen things, they often do get left for a long time, that is something that we want to look at as far as being able to say, this is a less viewed page, it is a less reviewed page, take it with a larger grain of salt.
Yes.
Is there been lots of sorts of abuse that you didn't necessarily predict, and how do you feel personally when you've written all the software and then see the ways that it's exploited?
Well, there's, I guess, two kinds of abuse. There's personal abuse and there's technical abuse. The kind of abuse that horrifies us is when we write some cute little feature for having template pages where you can have a specially formatted table and use it multiple times, and people try to turn it into a calculator with a big set of slide rule templates where the template for the value 23 is 24, and this is the add 1 template. So when those things tend to happen, we kind of have to sit down and figure out, well, what's a better way of doing that so people don't make us cry? So recently, one of our other developers, Tim Starling, put together an additional extension explicitly for handling little bits of arithmetic or little simple if-def kind of chunks in a way that actually works correctly and performs well, instead of having to load 5 different templates. So that's something that we can at least work with by working with the people who want to do something productive. And then the other kind is spamming, or people signing up on multiple accounts and saying and trying to abuse some other user. Harassment that exists to some degree. For instance, if someone has become an administrator on the site where they can delete junk pages and block IP addresses that are used to vandalize, those people sometimes get abused by someone who is a total jerk and just wants to harass anyone who is actually trying to be productive. And that's more of a harder issue, of course, because it's more of a social issue. So those are harder to deal with in that, you can try to ban having lots of exclamation points in a username when, the usernames are all so-and-so is a jerk, so-and-so is a whatever. But that's obviously not going to solve your problem. They're going to use a 1 instead of an exclamation point. So that's something that maybe is harder to figure out. And yes, you have a question.
Can you talk about efforts to get Wikipedia to offline users?
There actually is a company in Germany that has been doing this. I unfortunately didn't bring them in here with me, but I have a copy of a couple things. They have a DVD-ROM edition with an offline reader of the German language Wikipedia that they publish a couple of times a year, new updated versions, and they have a whole bunch of the articles. They've done some additional fact-checking and formatting, and they have a little search tool, and it's a multi-platform ebook reader kind of thing. It's pretty exciting, and they also do some published books of extracts of articles on a certain topic.
Like a live CD, or is it HTML, or meaning is it static? It is static content, but is it?
Yeah, it's what's it called? Something like Digibib Reader or something. It's a program that exists for handling sort of large ebook content, and they have it formatted in this format, and they have the reader for it for Windows, Mac, Linux, Palm, Pocket PC. It's a really impressive list on this thing. But currently they only do a German language edition, and we don't have an English version yet. We've talked a bit with Mandriva, the Linux publisher, about the possibility that they might include some English, French, Portuguese versions. I don't think that's finished yet. I don't know if they're still working on that or not. But we do publish regular sort of raw dumps of all the content from the site, and our software is free. So if you have the will and the money, I guess, you can take that and then publish it in whatever form you like, as long as you're working with the license. And some people have taken advantage of that to produce some cool stuff, and others are still kind of talking about it.
What's the economic model for the Wikimedia and Wikipedia, and will it sustain the kind of growth you're looking for?
Well, what we have so far is a not-for-profit corporation, primarily funded by donations. We run a fundraiser drive a couple of times a year. We also kind of put out feelers for grants and things. So obviously we don't get a huge budget from that, but we do get enough to make it work surprisingly well. Our yearly budget this year, I think, is something like $500,000 for several hundred servers and like 3 staff. And yet here we are serving thousands of pages a second at a sort of level of traffic that multi-million-dollar companies, maybe some multi-billion-dollar companies, are sort of next to us in the rankings. We're very much using open source software. We have some free hardware and free network where we can get it, some discount stuff otherwise. But we are still an independent organization which is committed to producing free, open source, open content material, and have it be possible to then take that and be reproduced for instance, third world things like the $100 laptop project, things like that. Maybe we're not serving everybody yet. Obviously, primarily we only serve people who have internet access, so that's only a portion of the world. But the theory, at least, is a sort of a charitable act of creating all this material for the public.
There seem to be a lot of sites that clone your content and support themselves with ads. What
there are
you
some
feeling
yes.
about that?
Well, what are you going to do?
Are you committed to not doing advertising yourself?
For the moment, we'll see where it goes eventually, because certainly at our level of traffic, we could make a pretty fair chunk of money from ads. The question is, do we want to? And what would that do to the community that has been built if we do that? But we might end up doing that just because would be the most obvious way to bring in a large chunk of cash to then grow the organization further. So it may happen, it may not. It depends on sort of what the ideological stance is.
You can use Google AdSense. Google AdSense.
Possibly. Obviously, this company called Google I heard about, it's got an ad program that's pretty good. So yeah, we might look into that. But not in the immediate near future, because we're still at the moment not doing ads. But if we do, obviously, that G company is a pretty obvious choice to talk to. So.
I think on the same line, once you start making money, what's the advantage for the users to put data on your servers? Right now, people are putting data because it's like
that's exactly one of the questions. But then a lot of companies get reams and reams of user-provided material under very restrictive licenses and have ads everywhere. But so who knows?
It's an ignorant question, but how are you funded? It's an ignorant question, but how are you funded?
Primarily through personal donations. 2 or 3 times a year, we'll run a fundraiser drive. We just have a little message at the top of the site that says, hey, if you want us to stay online in the long term, we do need a little bit of money. It's kind of like PBS, NPR or something. Every once in a while, they run a fundraiser during your favorite program. They interrupt it and say, please give us money or we'll never play your program again. And you go, fine, here's some money, shut up. So that's our primary income for now. But we're also feeling here and there for grants, but they tend to be more at specific individual things. So for instance, working on some particular feature for some particular site, sometimes somebody will get a grant to work on that, but not sort of towards the general operating budget. Yes?
So is it tax-deductible donations?
Yes, we are a 501c3, whatever have you, and theoretically at least are tax-deductible in the US. The actual information for that should be on our site, which is wikimediafoundation.org. So if you want to give us money, by all means, we would love to have it. Yes?
Yeah, I noticed the next slide was going to be something about that ubiquitous acronym, AJAX. And I was just wondering, how much of a barrier between, well, okay, maybe you're going to say this, how much of a barrier is there to learn the wiki markup language, and are you interested in addressing this?
As far as our wacky markup languages, certainly a very hot topic these days in the wiki world is WYSIWYG editing. A number of commercial wikis have already done this for a while. A number of non-commercial open source wikis have experimental plugins for it. There have been a couple of people sort of experimenting with this for MediaWiki. At the moment, we aren't doing it quite yet because to really do it reliably requires really fixing up our markup to actually work reliably. Our parser in our software is sort of a mess of regular expressions that have been mashed one on top of the other for 4 years. And they mostly work most of the time, but there's a lot of undefined behavior. There's a lot of, oh, that shouldn't happen. And the general way that WYSIWYG editing works is you produce HTML, you toss it into an HTML editor widget, and then you send that HTML back and try to convert it back to your internal markup. And that gets really hard when you have complicated things like we have embedded images with captions, formatting, templates where the content of some page might actually come from another page, all kinds of horrible, evil things, which if we just took the HTML and sent it back, all your pages would break when you edit them. So we're kind of worried about making sure that we do it right and compatible and not break things all the time. So that means we have to figure out for our hacked up syntax how it actually should work. And then sort of make the differences between how it should work and how it does work known. And then we can fix those parts that are broken now and just have it break once, and then it's not broken anymore. And then we can start doing both WYSIWYG editing and also a lot more conversion, export, being able to, for instance, produce DocBook or open document or PDF printable versions in a much more reliable way, and being able to have materials that are just machine readable in a much more useful way. So hopefully we'll get that done this summer, where you kind of have it scheduled, because people keep yelling at us about it, and they saying, we want WYSIWYG. And we say, yeah, but we need this, so we'll do this. So hopefully that should be ready later this year.
Yes. Could you list some of the related projects? Like, I think I've seen the dictionary.
We have Wikipedia, the encyclopedia, Wiktionary, the dictionary. I always hate saying that because it just sounds so silly to put the words together. We have Wikibooks, which is a collection of sort of textbook materials that can be reproduced freely. A wiki quoted quote database, several other smaller ones that I probably forget. And then sort of the more exciting ones are Wikimedia Commons, which is our multimedia repository for open content, freely licensed and public domain photographs, video files, sound clips. Currently, our support for video files isn't as good as we'd like it to be. Hopefully, we'll find someone for Summer of Code to help fix that up. And also the Wiki News news project, which is certainly an interesting experiment. So that's most of them, I hope. But if you go to wikimedia.org, you can see them all, in case I missed some. Okay, so Ajax, yes. This was in the context of caching. And I only have 3 minutes left, which is good because I'm 2 slides from the end. Oh, I'm 3 slides from the end. So we'll just ignore Ajax because it's lots of cool stuff. But we also are going to start doing identity integration. We're going to support OpenID. In the next month, we're merging our internal login databases, which have been separate. And so all those fun bloggers on LiveJournal will be able to use their LiveJournal IDs to log in. And also, as far as integrating with both client-side bot tools for maintenance and such, but also mashups and taking media content in a convenient way, and all that stuff. We're going to be adding more web services APIs in the vein of Google and Flickr and all those fun places. And that's basically what I just covered. And yeah, that's it. So, last chance for questions, I guess, because we're almost out of time. And no one has any more questions? Nope, you do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of it for the Firefox extensions to basically just put your cursor on a word and actually shows up on Wikipedia. And that makes a big difference to the users, not having to type in words.
Yeah. More than sort of, transparent, cool little, click on something and there it goes. Would definitely be very exciting. There are some experimental plugins for doing things like when you hover over a link, it fetches the first few paragraphs of the article so you can preview something very quickly. That's pretty similar to a lot of nice sites like Netflix, for instance, is pretty similar to that. But there's all kinds of really cool experimental things that even users are doing. We have a system on the site where they can plug in their own JavaScript for their own login, which is kind of similar to what GreaseMonkey, for instance, provides, but with any browser, because it doesn't require an external plugin. So there's a lot of exciting work being done by users and other people, and hopefully we'll sort of be able to push more of that out.
So does it put extra load on your servers if everybody's looking at common words?
A little bit, yeah, but hopefully that's the kind of thing that we can cache very effectively, in which case it becomes much less of a load. So, thank you everybody for listening to our cool stuff, and by all means, visit the site, say good things about your company, but don't cheat on your article. That's no fair. So, great.